let me tell you about my close associate, weather. We mean the same thing, really, but we're used a little differently. Weather likes to combine with or not in adverb clauses to say that something just doesn't matter. The result will be the same no matter what. Robert is going to marry Andrea whether his parents approve or not. Robert is obviously a strong-headed young man. Some people might say that he's disrespectful of his parents. Their approval doesn't seem to matter to him. Now, if you stick even in front of me and get even if, there's a special meaning that's very similar to whether. Robert is going to marry Andrea even if his parents disapprove. Like whether or not, even if says that something just doesn't matter. The result will be the same. Is even if the same as even though? No, sorry. Jim is going to marry Marcia, even though his parents disapprove. In this case, we know that Jim's parents disapprove. Even though usually talks about real situations. Even if usually talks about hypothetical situations. See the difference? I thought that you did. Ah, yes. It's time for us to get to know each other. Or should I say, renew our acquaintance? I know I'm not new to you. I'm if. I'm just two letters, an I and an F. But I'm very powerful. I live in your imagination. You know how people like to talk about hypothetical situations? That means possibilities we invent in our imaginations. For instance, let me imagine something you might do. I know. Maybe you will click on the pause button in the corner. All right? That's the situation, the condition that I'm imagining. Well, what would be the result? That's where if comes in. If you click on the pause button, I'll stop talking. And of course, if you don't click on the pause button, I'll keep talking. If gives a condition that will produce a certain result. All hypothetical, of course. Usually it's a good idea to stay away from using future verb forms in my adverb clauses. And I'll be back to talk to you about the other words listed in the chart. Words like whether and unless. Bye.
Now, my favorite, while, has two meanings, okay? The first meaning tells you about a time relationship. While my husband and I were camping in the wilderness, a bear got into our tent. All right, so in that sentence, while means during the time that. And now for the second meaning. Well, while can contrast ideas, can show that something is the opposite of something else. My husband likes to go camping in the wilderness for vacation, while I prefer to visit big cities such as London. And, you could also use whereas instead of while. It means the same thing. But whereas is pretty uncommon. You'll run into it in reading more often than speaking, and even then, not too often. My husband likes to be in the wilderness, whereas I like to visit big cities. Notice that these clauses use a comma even when the adverb clause comes second in the sentence. You can read about that in the chart.
In case you were wondering, there is more than one way to talk about possible conditions. I'm the most common. Me, that is. I mean, if. You've met whether and even if. Now let's talk about in case. In case means if, but it's even iffier than if that makes any sense at all. For instance, I don't think you need more information, but the possibility exists that you might. So I'll say to you, in case you should need more information, look in a grammar handbook or a dictionary. In the event that is very similar, but is quite formal. In the event that you should need more information, look in a grammar handbook or a dictionary.
Hi there. I'm Unless. You can go ahead to the next screen unless you want to hear some information about me. Well, I can say that another way. You can go ahead to the next screen if you do not want to hear what I have to say. I can be really tricky to understand sometimes. Oh, here's a simpler example. I don't eat unless I am hungry. I don't eat if I am not hungry. Those two sentences mean the same thing. That's what I do. I give the same meaning as if not. Well, unless you have any more questions, I've got to be going now. Bye.
Didn't you tell me earlier that you wanted to go to the championship soccer game? Well, only if you already have a ticket can you go to the game. No ticket? Sorry, you're out of luck. Watch it on TV. There's no way you can get into that game unless you already have a ticket. The only way to get into that game is to have a ticket. Notice what happens to the subject and verb of the main clause. You can go to the game only if you have a ticket. But only if you have a ticket can you go to the game. Just one of those things in English. You invert the subject and verb if the only if clause comes first. It's like beginning a sentence with a negative word. Never have I heard that name before. You can check that out in Unit D of the appendix.